This is a very different kind of video for me. I am on camera for this one, which is unexpected and definitely not quite what I imagined my theoretical first time being on camera on YouTube would be like. But whatever, that is what happened, and I guess all I'll say is enjoy watching me grow increasingly tired over the course of this video while I lie down on the couch, barely lifting my head at the end of a very long day at work on the first Tuesday after daylight savings time. I think you're gonna have a great time, so enjoy.
So I've been thinking about filming this video for a couple weeks now, and it's just like the logistics of actually creating the video, since it's not one where we're going to have bottles of perfume to look at the entire time, have just been kind of throwing me for a loop. Because what do we look at? You know, I was picturing having to find just like a lot of images and then just doing a whole lot of Ken Burns effect, like panning and zooming. But the thing is that like I do want to share this, so maybe this is the way to do it. So just, you know, go for it, do it live. Post work, lying down on the couch, maybe not even lifting my head. This is Louie. So the thing that I want to talk about was the smell of purple. It came about because recently I filmed a video where I looked at 3 different jasmine perfumes, and I was struck by the fact that 2 of them I said smelled purple to me. And I realized that when I said that I was talking about a very specific thing, and it turns out a very specifically American thing. We'll get to that. And also something that is not related to perfume exactly, because if you ask a perfume enthusiast what the smell of purple is, they're probably going to say something like lilac or violet or lavender, you know, like a purple flower. And this is not that. This is very different. So much cat hair on my face. One of the funny things that I realized is that when I said those perfumes smelled purple, and the ones that I was talking about were Tom Ford Jasmine Rouge and Mugler Alien. And when I said that they smelled purple to me, I was literally talking about the color purple more than a smell. So the first thing that came to my mind was like, actually this color purple, because it's the color that we, at least in America, we associate with this particular kind of like grape flavored product. So like grape soda, grape Kool-Aid, grape candies, grape popsicles, which sometimes we just refer to as purple. So like there's even a Sunny Delight commercial where they talk about the purple stuff refrigerator, and like you automatically know what that is. Side note, not sure if this is also a generational thing, like if this is something the younger generations where artificial flavors and colors have not been as popular. Maybe this is a scent association that is also sort of particular to my older generation. So that's possible too. So the cat is now gone, but I'm still reclining because it's the first week after daylight savings time, and I am struggling a little bit. So this is just what we're doing. Kind of rude, but it's my channel, whatever. I can do what I want. Yeah, so the purple smell that I'm talking about is a very distinct, recognizable kind of sweet, bold, juicy, round grape flavor / scent. Either one, flavor / scent. And it's specifically a Concord grape flavor / scent, which matters. So I noticed that in the Jasmine Rouge and Mugler's Alien, mostly in the opening. But it's something that I've noticed in a lot of perfumes over the years. So not just those jasmine perfumes, but other ones too that I can think of off the top of my head that I have bottles for that I can maybe show. Les Sables Parfum, the original EDP, and then Britney Spears' Radiance. And both of those do have jasmine in the notes, so is it jasmine? But the Les Sables is primarily an orange blossom perfume, and Radiance is primarily a tuberose perfume. So is the grapey smell coming from something else? It turns out that grapey smell is because of a chemical compound called methyl anthranilate, which can be produced synthetically, and often is, but it's also found naturally in quite a few common perfumery ingredients. So jasmine, yes, tuberose, orange blossom, but also gardenia, wisteria, ylang ylang, I said orange blossom already, neroli, oranges, mandarins, lemons, bergamot, strawberries, and grape. But again, Concord grape specifically. So Concord grape is a New World grape grown in the Americas, and it has that distinct purple smell. And it turns out that Old World grapes from Europe, so the red and white grape varieties, they do not contain methyl anthranilate. So they have a different scent and flavor profile that is not like this purple smell. So yeah, a lot of potential perfumes. That's a lot of different kinds of ingredients that you find in many different types of perfumes. You know, a high concentration of methyl anthranilate or whatever formula happens to highlight that in a particular way can trigger that purple smell for me. So that makes sense. Now going back to the Concord grape. The Concord grape is a lot newer than I thought it was. It actually was developed in the mid 19th century. So in the 1850s, there's a man named Ephraim Bull, which is a great name. He was living in the Boston area, specifically in a town called Concord, and he was looking for a hardier variety of grapes that would better withstand the harsh conditions of New England winters. And he tried a bunch of different things, and he came up with a grape that we now know as Concord grape, which was, a big, round, juicy grape with that deep purple color and the very sweet flavor that was very appealing. So in 1853, he presented this new grape varietal at the Boston Horticultural Society, their annual exhibition, and he won first prize. And everybody loved it. It was very popular. It was like easy to grow. It tasted great. It looked great. It smelled great. And so a new grape was born, and the smell of purple was about to become a thing. Side note, the Concord grape is also sometimes known as the fox grape. And that's because apparently the musk glands and urine of foxes also contain methyl anthranilate. So they also sometimes have a little bit of that like grapey smell. And before the Concord grape was around, when people encountered that kind of like grapey smell, they sometimes said it smelled foxy. So, do with that what you will. All right, so 1853, you've got this new type of grape everybody loves, smells like fox urine. How does it become so popular where it becomes synonymous with a color? One of the things that led to its popularity was the temperance movement. If you're not familiar with that, it started in the 19th century and went through like Prohibition in 1920 in the United States, but it's a movement basically that believed that alcohol was the root of the downfall of man and family and society. It's immoral and evil, and it should be outlawed. They didn't want people to drink alcohol, and so they were always looking for non-alcoholic alternatives. So that's one reason why, maybe people be more interested in a grape soft drink. Another factor that played into this was these members of the temperance movement. They were also founding sort of utopian anti-alcohol communities, like actual towns that were called Temperance Towns. And these were spread across the country and even in the UK in the like late 19th century. So there's one called Prohibition City in Staten Island in New York. Palo Alto was apparently a temperance town. Greeley, Colorado is another one that's kind of famous. And then there's one in Wales near Cardiff that was just called Temperance Town. I guess they didn't really want to think about a name, so they just went with that. There's one in New Jersey called Vineland. The founder of this town, Charles something, he found this plot of land, and the conditions there were particularly good for growing grapes, and the Concord grape especially. So he was like, call it Vineland, tell people to come here and grow grapes. And one of the people who did decide to do that was a man named Thomas Welch. Yes, that Welch. Thomas Welch was a Methodist minister and a dentist who decided to move his family to Vineland and start growing delicious Concord grapes. And he was a member of the temperance movement also. So with his congregation, he didn't want them to drink communion wine. You could make grape juice, non-alcoholic grape juice. There are ways of doing this that involved things like making concentrates of grape and reconstituting them with water, boiling raisins, which sounds terrible. But he had all these new Concord grapes he was growing, and he had also recently learned, as everybody had, about a thing called pasteurization. So this is the 1860s. And if you remember from elementary school science, Louis Pasteur, he found that if you boiled milk, you could kill the microbes in it and make it safe to drink. That is my elementary school explanation of pasteurization. Anyway, it was a new technology, and Thomas Welch was the first one to decide to make pasteurized grape juice. So grape juice that wouldn't ferment and wouldn't turn into wine. And he brought it to his church to use for communion, and they loved it. And then he started shopping it around to all the other churches, and he was promoting it as, I believe the name was Dr. Welch's Unfermented Wine. So great marketing there. So that was 1869. He did the first pasteurized grape juice. And then he and his son, Charles, who was also a dentist, they did dentistry for a while, but then they decided to they eventually formed the Welch's Grape Company, which we now know today. In America, they make, all the jellies and grape soda and grape products. They're expanding to lots of other fruits lately, but like they're grapes. And funny enough, Welch's grape company is now located in Concord, Massachusetts. So it came right back to where we started in Concord. Side note on the temperance movement, if you want to read a little more about temperance, which is, it's kind of a weird thing, there is a woman named Carrie Nation. I actually did a book report on her in high school, who is quite an interesting character. If you can see, she's like a little grandmother looking lady, usually dressed in all black and carrying like a little hatchet. And that's because she was known for going into bars and taking her little hatchet and being accompanied by women singing religious hymns, and she would smash up the bar basically with the little hatchet. And she often got arrested for this, and at one point she started selling souvenir miniature hatchets to help pay her fines, which good for her. She also released a couple of newsletters. One was called The Smashing Mail. Another one was just called The Hatchet. Now, she had her shtick. She knew what would sell and what would make a good story. So Carrie Nation, interesting figure if you want to read about her. Side note number 2 on temperance, there's another very interesting woman named Fannie Farmer. Fannie Farmer is also very active in the 1890s. She was one of the first women to lecture at Harvard on domestic science. So she was known for bringing kind of scientific rigor to cooking. Her most famous cookbook is called the Boston Cooking School Cookbook, which is now, it's still in print and still popular. It's now oftentimes just called the Fannie Farmer Cookbook. And I think this is the first one where she introduced a system of level measures. So instead of saying like a handful of flour or a pinch of salt, she was talking about like level cups and teaspoons and ounces and things like that. So she brought a level of precision to measurements in recipes, and kind of, I think she's sometimes kind of thought of as the mother of the modern recipe. So really fascinating person, also a member of the temperance movement. And that cookbook included a recipe for grape aid, which called for mixing carbonated water with Concord grape juice or other temperance beverages. So another interesting person who's kind of related, and she is related. She did help further the popularity of things like grape juice and grape soda, which became more and more popular, and they were all marketed with this deep purple Concord grape color, which now for me and many others like me, very closely associated with this particular smell of purple. She is part of how that came about. Now the Welches, they had all their success with their grapes. They were growing Concord grapes, and those naturally had lots of methyl anthranilate, so they had that very distinct purple flavor now. But what's a person to do if you don't have easy access to your own Concord grape vines, grape vineyard? Well, in the 1890s, scientists were first able to extract methyl anthranilate from neroli oil. It was neroli oil. Orange blossom neroli. They were able to extract it for the first time, and then they also found out that they could make it synthetically from coal tar, which is a byproduct of coal production. So in the 1890s, we'd seen like a century pretty much of like rapid industrialization, lots of industries using coal. In the United States in 1869, the same year that Thomas Welch did his pasteurized grape juice, that's the same year that the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. So lots of demand for coal, lots of coal production, which meant there were lots of coal byproducts that were very cheap and very readily available, which meant that methyl anthranilate, you could easily produce it synthetically using coal tar. Side note too, the coal tar is used for a lot of medical reasons, and it's actually on the World Health Organization's list of like essential medicines or something. You can derive things like paracetamol, acetaminophen, and like dandruff shampoos from coal tar. So, coal, bad for the planet, but coal tar, apparently lots of uses. So people who are producing food products and beverages and wanted to use methyl anthranilate for flavoring or scent, they now had this new, very readily available, easy to mass produce source. At the same time, in the 1890s, perfumers were also very eager to pick up this synthetically produced methyl anthranilate for their ingredients as well. For all of those notes that we talked about, like bergamot, gardenia, any of those things. It's one more tool to add to their toolkit to be able to create these accords using a synthetic ingredient, which obviously is just much easier to work with. It's it doesn't vary based on like growing seasons or yields, and it's much less labor intensive to produce and very cheap. So they were also very happy to have this synthetically produced methyl anthranilate thanks to coal tar railroads. Another side note, one of the most common uses for methyl anthranilate these days, if you Google it, is as bird repellent, so to keep birds away from crops, and nuisance geese to repel them. So, you know, methyl anthranilate, it smells great, it tastes great, and birds hate it. All right, so where were we? Concord grape, temperance movement, coal tar to make methyl anthranilate. Well, those are the kind of main factors that led to this purple smell gaining popularity in the United States during this time period. But I learned in the process of looking into this that this purple smell, it's an American thing. It does not exist in the same way in other countries, particularly European countries and the UK. In those countries, purple is more often associated with blackcurrant, which is another kind of fruit, which is not popular in the United States, and we'll get to that in a second. So our purple Skittle is grape flavored. It's that Concord grape. And in the UK, for example, their purple Skittle is blackcurrant. And a lot of the same, like similar products that you would get as purple products here, like jellies and jams and juices and things, they are blackcurrant in these other countries, which makes sense. I mean, blackcurrants are delicious, so why wouldn't they become associated with purple and kind of dominate the imagination in that way? And again, in Europe, their grapes do not contain methyl anthranilate, so they don't have this particular very like bold and vibrant flavor. So another reason why blackcurrant would be the one to kind of win the purple crown. So why was it the grape in America versus the blackcurrant? Because I like blackcurrant a lot, and I've always wondered why it wasn't more popular here. It turns out that in 1911, the United States federal government banned the cultivation, sale, and transport of blackcurrant anywhere in the United States. Before 1911, blackcurrants, you know, they were around in the United States. They were used in recipes and products, and they were just another delicious fruit that we enjoyed here. But starting then with the federal ban, you couldn't buy them, you couldn't sell them, you couldn't grow them, you couldn't access them, you couldn't eat them, you couldn't think about them. They were just not a part of American life anymore all of a sudden. And this is because the blackcurrant bush was found to carry a fungal blight known as the white pine blister rust, which threatened a species of pine tree, the white pine, which was really important to the American lumber industry. And that sounds kind of extreme because blackcurrants are great, so what's the big deal if a couple of trees could kind of get damaged? Well, it turns out in 1911, that was kind of the height of what is known as the death of the American chestnut tree. Before the early 20th century, almost the entire eastern half of the United States was covered by like literally billions of American chestnut trees. It was said that a squirrel could travel from Georgia to Maine, never touching the ground, just through the canopy of these trees. They were that common everywhere. By all accounts, this was like an ideal tree. It was very tall. It was sometimes called the Eastern redwood, because they could be over 100 feet tall. Their trunks would be over 10 feet in diameter. And they're popular as street trees because they're very straight. They provided great shade. They grew quickly. They grew to maturity quickly. So great for, you know, landscape architecture and also for lumber production. Their lumber was very durable, so it was great for building construction purposes. Anything you need something strong, but it was also beautiful. So it was used for decorative objects and furniture. And then on top of that, it produced edible chestnuts. So every year there's this hugely readily available food source that people used for livestock, they used just to eat on their own. So it was just in every way a tree that people loved and was a really common part of people's lives. So in 1904, a man at the Bronx Zoo in New York, he discovered an American chestnut tree that had little like orange-red spots on the bark. And the tree wasn't looking so good, and it died pretty soon after. And after that, a lot of the American chestnut trees around it started to die too. Not other trees, but just the American chestnut. So they eventually found that this was another fungal blight, what is it called? Sometimes called a canker, I think. That was another word they used. I think it might just be called chestnut blight. If that's wrong, I'll add a note. It was brought in by a Japanese chestnut tree that was imported and was impervious to this blight. But the American chestnut tree was very susceptible. It died really quickly and it spread really quickly. And nothing we could do was stopping it. So no chemicals were able to eradicate the blight. They tried chopping down like large swaths of trees to separate the infected ones from the non-infected ones from the healthy ones, but like none of it worked. It just kept spreading and spreading and spreading, and the trees kept dying to the point where, you know, around 4 years later in 1908, there was this big story in the New York Times just basically predicting the inevitable death and extinction of the American chestnut tree because nothing was working. So there was just kind of this sense of like hopelessness that like they could see it happening and they couldn't stop it, and it sounded really terrible. So that's 1908, and then 1911, it makes total sense that the government would be like, you know, blackcurrants are great, but we just can't take this risk. So the New York Times article wasn't wrong. They were not able to stop this. So it spread and spread and spread until the 1950s and the 1960s. The American chestnut tree was effectively extinct. And I think even today there may be just a couple hundred existing in the United States. So that's really sad. Not just like the economic impacts, but just think about kind of like the emotional, kind of personal, psychological impacts of that. Like if you grew up and these beautiful giant trees are just all around you, like part of the actual literal physical landscape of your life. Maybe you work in a lumber yard that processes the lumber from these trees, or you make furniture from them, you eat the chestnuts every year. They're just part of like your neighborhood. And then within a few years, they're all dead because of this blight. And that's not a problem that you can solve instantly. You can't like instantly bring in a whole bunch of mature trees to replace the ones that you've lost there. So it left a lasting physical scar on a lot of places in the United States. And it must have been just really, really awful and it's a very heartbreaking story. The plus side is that it did lead to more protective measures about, being careful about invasive species and things like that. And that 1911 ban with the blackcurrants, I think, was one of the early examples of the government stepping in to say, hey, this could be a problem, so we need to be really careful. The good news is that there are groups of scientists who are really actively working to bring back the American chestnut tree, trying to develop blight-resistant versions. So there are people who are really working hard to try and bring it back. So maybe we can one day see how great they were. So yeah, the federal ban on blackcurrants was lifted in 1966. And then a lot of states had their own individual bans that lasted until the early 2000s. But even just 1966, that was 55 years where there were no blackcurrants to be had in America. So people just stopped thinking about them. They weren't a part of our lives. So imagine it's 1920 in America, and the United States federal government has just declared prohibition. You can no longer buy, sell, or drink alcohol anywhere in the country. Wink, wink. So what do? Well, thanks to Ephraim Bowl, there's delicious Concord grape flavor that can be used to make temperance-friendly, non-alcoholic, unfermented grape juice, thanks to people like Thomas Welch and Louis Pasteur and Fannie Farmer even. And there are lots of these products that are very readily available because you can synthetically produce methyl anthranilate thanks to byproducts from the coal industry and the railroads. And blackcurrant is nowhere to be found, so it's great for everybody. Everything is coming up purple and grape. So yeah, basically that is kind of why sometimes things smell purple to me, because I'm thinking of purple equals this grape flavor / scent, which is because of methyl anthranilate, which occurs naturally in a lot of common perfumery ingredients, flowers and fruits that you find a lot. And I'm in America where we couldn't get blackcurrants. So that's why. Those are the things that I've learned about the smell of purple. Kind of a low effort video. I mean, maybe not. Maybe by the time this goes up, I will have come up with lots of beautiful visuals, and maybe you won't even see any of this. And the question that just took me down a lot of unexpected side paths that I thought were fun to learn about, and hopefully you found them fun to hear about. And I would love to hear, is what I'm describing the smell of purple to you? Does the smell of purple mean something entirely different to you? Are there any other colors that you smell when you smell perfumes? I would love to hear all of that. So yeah, let me know, and thanks for watching, and that's all I'm going to say.
Love the color of Welch's purple grape juice. Purple is the color of things that are very special, like the Concord grapes in Welch's. Purple things taste special, and Welch's grape juice is very purple.